In this video, I'm going to show you how I designed and built custom flat panel hollow core doors with recessed handles. Actually, this came about because I designed the dresser drawers first, and then when I went to do the bifold doors, realized I couldn't live with just putting knobs or something on the front of the doors.
Ow!
So I started this project in SketchUp looking at the components of stiles, rails, but in particular trying to understand how I was going to fabricate the recessed handle that would then get covered over with white oak panel. Here you can see a set of parts ready for glue up, mostly made of poplar. In the center though, you'll notice the subcomponent for the recessed handle made of oak. Keeping the doors flat during glue up is super critical, so I took a sheet of 4x8 MDF and I cut it into 3 sections, acting as a foundation for my clamping surface. At one end of the table, I attached a stop block, and at the other end, drilled a couple of holes to use for applying clamping pressure. I planned all my dimensions, allowing for a 1/4 inch cutoff on all 4 sides of the doors. Now that my first dry fit checks out, I want to mark each part carefully so I don't mismatch any parts during the glue up. I just need a center mark at each joint to tell me where to place the dowel joiner and make the plunge cut. This is my second dry fit now to ensure that all the joints are tight and I don't foresee any problems about the assembly. Now flipping the piece over because actually I'm going to be gluing up the back panel first. After applying and spreading the glue, I sprinkle a little bit of sawdust at both ends to keep the panel from slipping around on the wet glue. Since this is the back of the door, which is inside the closet and no one will ever see it, I decided to save some money and went with birch paneling here. I guess if someone was hiding in my closet, they would see the back of the door, but in that case, I don't think I care about their opinion anyway. Because it's only 1/4 inch paneling, I'm using some hardwood culls to even out the pressure along the edges. After letting the glue dry overnight, it's time to flip it over. We've only got one side done. You'll see that I use wax paper to keep it from gluing to itself to the MDF. And here's an important step where I'm using blue tape to protect the interior of the recessed handle feature so that any glue on the second side, which is going to be the front, that drips down into the cavity is not going to stick to the oak wood. Here is an important little jig piece I built. It's a triangle cut on the table saw to fit inside, and this is going to give me a guide to run the laminate trimmer against later because of that recess area. Now it's on to gluing up the white oak panel to the face of the door. I want to be really careful around the recessed handle not to have too much squeeze out and have to deal with the problem there. After letting it dry overnight, I now need to deal with how to trim away the paneling that covers the recessed handle area. I made this jig on the table saw. It allows me to slip it into the recessed handle area so that I can mark the surface knowing where to cut. This is definitely the most nerve-wracking cut on a project. I'm basically cutting blind, and if I screw this up, I would have to start the project over again. That said, I am giving myself a little wiggle room, working just to the inside of the true mark. Now I can square up the edges with the laminate trimmer before getting into a lot of handwork with the hand file, sandpaper, back and forth until I get a good clean edge. My wife hasn't said anything about her missing fingernail files. Well, good results with the finish around the door handle. Now it's on to trimming off that 1/4 inch on the outside edges that I mentioned before. I'm hot gluing 2-inch edge band material to the sides of the doors here, followed by a hard roller to set it down good. And following that with a razor trimmer to cut off the excess edge band material, which I'm not having good results with. After some trial and error, I've decided the laminate trimmer is the best way to get a square edge on the edge banding, followed by a flat file to soften the edge and remove the last of the glue. I screwed up by cutting one of the edge band strips too short, but was able to patch in a little piece that seemed to cover pretty well. I've clamped a pair of doors together before trimming to true length. I really like this Makita track saw system. The right angle guide that slides onto the base track, as well as the clamps that fit under the table and hold down both ends secure. I picked up this center pin template so that I could cut the slots into the door edge for the hardware that needs to be attached. I needed a fairly elaborate jig in order to control the router. It's a 1/2 inch router bit, but it needs a 5/8 inch opening for the hardware. The 2 pins on the base plate keep the router bit centered on the work, and then by using a shim on either side, I was able to nudge the bit a 1/16 of an inch to either side in order to make up the 5/8. Snapping the hardware into place is oddly satisfying. I'm going with 4 coats of finish with the 220 grit sanding in between each coat. I like the general finishes polyurethane, choosing the flat finish because it doesn't show any reflections, so I can really see that grain come through. I bought 3 different brands of hardware kits for these bifold doors, rejected 2 and finally settled on the Sugatsuni hardware system. Look for a link in the description below for a video on the Sugatsuni hardware.